over there. All right, let's begin. Can't wait any longer. So yesterday we learned this Gemara. I must say it's not such a simple Gemara because the Gemara, it tries to connect two arguments and say one is really, it's really the same argument, just two different expressions of this argument. They really hold the same thing. And so we have an argument between Rav and Rabbi Bar Bar Chana about the law of what order to recite the bracha Leishev Basukkah and Shehechiyanu. And that argument seems to be the same as an argument between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai regarding the brachas of Kiddush. Do you say the bracha of the wine before or after the bracha of the Mekadesh HaShabbos? So the order of brachas of Kiddush on Shabbos, that argument would seemingly be a similar argument about the orders of the brachas of the Kiddush on the first night of Sukkot. That's what the Gemara is dealing with. Now, the only problem, the reason I say it's a little hard is if you look at the reasons behind it, Rav spells out his reason. And he says it has to do with chiyuva diyoima. And the Gemara wants to say Rav holds like Beis Shammai. But Beis Shammai spells out their reason, and they don't say that same idea of chiyuva diyoima. They say a different reason altogether. So how does the Gemara say that it's that we should say that it's the same argument? They're not agreeing. Their reasons are not the same. And so one of the commentaries says that sometimes you find that even though the rabbis said a reason, that's not the ikar reason. That's not the main reason. And it's almost like when you want to go somewhere, you don't always explain the essence of why you want to go there. A lot of times it gets clouded up between a alternative reason that you want to go also because of another thing, and you mention that reason, even though there's really a deeper reason that maybe it's subconscious or maybe it's just not like on the tip of your tongue. So you sometimes have something called a tam hakomus, like a deeper reason why you want to do something. And when someone asks you, why do you want to go there? Why do you want to do this? You just mention like maybe an obvious reason or something that's more on the tip of your tongue, but it's not the essence of the reason why you really want to go there or you want to do something. And so that seems to be the way the Gemara understands the fact that Beis Shammai says his reasons, but really there might be a deeper reason behind it. It's almost like the mitzvahs. All mitzvahs, we say, a lot of them have reasons. We understand that there's it's called mishpatim. Mishpatim have reasons behind it. Even eidos, you can at least relate to. You understand they're commemorating different happenings, different stories, different miracles. And these reasons that we know of, or the commemorations, that is not necessarily the essence of the reason why we're supposed to do it. It's like a side reason. It's an additional reason. It's extra. There's some logic to it. There's some connection with that reason and why we're doing it. But that's not the essence of the reason. That's why all mitzvahs are really considered like chukim. And in fact, that's one of the reasons why it says that really all the Torah is really a chuk. Yeah, what do you mean? We have reasons. Some of the mitzvahs have no. There's sometimes you have reasons that's not the essence of the reason. It's an additional. It's like a side. It's more of a side reason, and there's really something deeper. That's the reason. So I'm mentioning that because it's connected over here to the Gemara. The Gemara says lema. Let's say that Rav and Rabba Bar Bar Chana are arguing about the same thing that Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel are arguing about. But it's not really true. Beis Shammai, if you look at the reasons, it's not. You don't find that. Beis Shammai says his reasons. He has two things that he mentions: Hayoim Goyrim Layayin Sheyavoid. The day causes the wine, and therefore you should say the day first before the wine. And he also says Kfar Kidesh Hayoim. The first thing that happens is that the day becomes holy before you make Kiddush. You first sanctify the day. And so time-wise, like, Ein Ma'avir Na'ala Mitzvahs, you don't pass over the mitzvahs. The first thing that happens is the day becomes holy, then you make it. So he has his reason there. And he doesn't say Chiyuva Diyoima Adif. He doesn't say the Chiyuva Diyoima reason. So how does the Gemara want to compare Rav and Beis Shammai if they say different reasons? You can't say they're arguing about the same thing. This one, he says his reasons and he says his reason. So one of the commentators wants to say that not necessarily does Beis Shammai's reasons express the essence of the reason. It could be the essence of the reason is about Chiyuva Diyoima Adif, that the essence of the day is the Chiyuva of the day. That's what's more important. And so maybe that's the reason why the Gemara thinks it could fit. Again, Rabba Bar Bar Chana holds like Beis Hillel. That's okay to say because Rabba Bar Bar Chana mentions about Tadir and Beis Hillel mentions about Tadir. So you could say they really argue about the same thing. You know, their argument maybe could fit. They're both saying Tadir v'Sheina Tadir. They're both following the same reasoning, but Beis Shammai doesn't seem to fit with Rav. So on this, the commentary wants to say Beis Shammai's reason is really not the essence of his reason. Maybe there's really a additional reason. It's really a more essential reason, and maybe it's more of a and he just doesn't mention it. Sometimes the Gemara doesn't mention the essence of the reason. That's one way of understanding it. I have another understanding myself that maybe the term chiyuva diyoima, when the Gemara says chiyuva diyoima, what's Rav's reason? Why should you mention the bracha leishev basukah before the bracha shechiyanu? So he says a reason of chiyuva diyoima, but we don't know what chiyuva diyoima means. It's a very ambiguous or cryptic type of words. The words don't clarify what that really means. In fact, all the commentaries, we mentioned like 5 different interpretations what chiyuva diyoima might mean. So maybe based on that, the Gemara finds it okay to compare Rav and Beis Shammai because Rav's reason is not really clear what he means, and maybe chiyuva diyoima is one of these ideas. The chiyuva diyoima, that the day comes first, the chiyuv of the day is adif because it hits first. You know, maybe you could fit it into those reasons. Maybe you could actually fit it. Again, chiyuva diyoima is not so clear what it means. Commentaries all struggle. In fact, it's interesting because all the commentaries that talk about it are the later achronim. They're like from the last, the last few hundred years that explain it. What about all the Rishonim? No one says chiyuva diyoima. What does chiyuva diyoima mean? So it seems that maybe chiyuva diyoima was something that was unclear what it means, and that's why the Gemara can say, well, maybe Rav holds like Beis Shammai because maybe that's the reason of Beis Shammai. Anyway, that's just a little thought that was bothering me yesterday, and I saw this commentary mention that, but I think this might be another reason, an alternative reason that could be said. Okay, so anyway, let's just go over what the Gemara what we learned yesterday, and so basically the Gemara had said that this argument we have Rav and Rabba Bar Bar Chana about what comes first with regard to Leishev Basukah versus Shechiyanu. And Rav said his reason about Chiyuva Diyoima, which we said again was a little unclear what Chiyuva Diyoima means, but for whatever it means, something to do with the fact that Sukkot has to come before Shechiyanu. And a lot of the commentaries seem to emphasize this idea that the Leishev Basukah emphasizes Sukkah more than the Shechiyanu. Doesn't really bring out that it's a specific bracha. So Leishev Basukah is a specific bracha about Sukkah, And Shechianu is more a general bracha. It doesn't reveal that it's sukkah. It's not specifically connected to this Yom Tov. So chiyuva diyoma, and then there's this other idea chiyuva diyoma that it's a chiyuv. It's that this mitzvah, this bracha involves action as well. I explained it yesterday. Maybe that the meaning of that is that a mitzvah bracha that has a mitzvah connected with it, it has maisa. So when it involves action, maybe that has a certain it has a certain quality and benefit to it that override that makes it more valuable, so to speak. That bracha has more. We respect it more because it has action to it, so it's more effective. It involves elevating the world in a more qualitative way and quantitative way of elevating the action. The act connects with action, with the mitzvah maisa, and so anyway, basically the mitzvah of sukkah has this chiyuv to it, of dwelling in the sukkah, building the sukkah. There's an action connected to it, or the concept of that it's impossible to recite the bracha of Leishev Basukkah before Sukkah. So it's a chiyuv, it's about the day obligation versus Shechianu, which could be recited really beforehand. You could say Shechianu before, so therefore this is more connected, it's more specific for this day, for this Yom Tov, and therefore the Leishev Basukkah has to come first. Afterwards, you can do Shechianu. Okay. Afterwards, you do Shechi. This is Rab's opinion. Chiyuva deyoima is adif, and you do Leishev Basukkah first. Rabba Bar Bar Chana says that the opposite. First, you do Shechianu, and then Sukkah, and the reason had to do with Tadir. What's more often done, at least on an obligational level. What is more Tadir? And the Shechianu is more tadir than Leishev Basukkah, which of course we got into the fact that Leishev Basukkah seemingly you have to say every day at least, and we say it many more times. But in essence, you could get away with one Leishev Basukkah, and Shechianu you need at least for the holidays you need Shechianu, and that would be four holidays. We asked yesterday, that why does Rashi emphasize that? It's noyeg b'chol haregolim. It's noyeg on the three holidays. He should say it's noyeg on all Yom Tovs, Shechianu. We say it on Rosh Hashanah and on Yom Kippur. And it turns out that this opinion that Rabba Bar Bar Chana is saying that it's tadir because you have it on all the regolim, all the holidays. Rabba Bar Bar Chana in another tractate, another Masechta, Rabba Bar Bar Chana actually says you don't say Shechianu on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. It's only a bracha on regalim. And therefore, because it's only a bracha on regalim on the holidays, therefore, the bracha of Shechianu is only said 4 times a year, according to Rabba Bar Bar Chana. And that's why Rashi only says regalim, because based on another Gemara. In other words, we say it more than 4 times. We say it on Rosh Hashanah, we say it on Yom Kippur. So my question on Rashi was based on the fact that we recite it more times, but Rashi is following the fact that Rashi is connecting this with another Gemara where we happen to know Rabba's opinion, and Rabba Bar Bar Chana's opinion is that you only say it on regalim, on the 3 pilgrimage holidays, not on the high holidays, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and therefore Rashi just mentions the regalim and not just all Yom Tovs. And so anyway, that's what Rabba Bar Bar Chana says, that first you would say the bracha on the tadir, which is Shechianu, then you say on the sukkah, and then you'd say on the Leishev Basukkah, which you could get away with one time in the whole sukkah theoretically, because you would be dwelling your whole week in the sukkah. So theoretically you're just saying it once, or your obligation of saying it would only be once. Of course, there's an option of leaving the sukkah and then coming back, and then you would recite it other times, but the obligation would be once. Okay. Then the Gemara says this question of, let's say Rav holds like Beis Shammai and Rabba Bar Bar Chana holds like Beis Hillel, and what was that argument about? It was about the laws of Kiddush. Well, we're also talking about Kiddush. We're talking about Kiddush Sukkot night. Yeah, Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel is talking about Kiddush Friday night. So the argument of the order of Kiddush on Sukkot maybe is the same argument of the order of Kiddush on a regular Friday night, because there's always this question of, do you say the Mekadesh HaShabbos first, or do you say the bracha on the wine first? And their reasons, at least I must say Beis Hillel's reason, does definitely remind us of Rabbi Bar Chana's reason. But the Gemara starts off with Rav and Beis Shammai, and Beis Shammai's reason, he gives, it's interesting, he gives a reason, and seemingly it's really two reasons. There's a vav there, ukavar kidesh hayoim. And so the way Rashi learns is that this is a second reason. There's two reasons that Beis Shammai says. And then if you look at Beis Hillel says davar acher. He like spells it out, another reason. Davar acher. It's interesting why he says davar acher, like emphasizes that I'm giving you two reasons. And Beis Shammai didn't spell it out like that. Beis Shammai just said ukvar kidesh hayoim. He only says and so that's the that's one of the questions the commentaries do ask. And one of the commentaries says Beis Shammai doesn't really need the second reason. Beis Hillel needs both, because he's answering up both reasons of Beis Shammai, and that's why he gives two reasons. That's one understanding. But it is a little surprising, the wording, because if he's saying two reasons, why does he davar acher? Why isn't it symmetrical with the Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai? They both should like use the same. The brisa should be bringing both, both reasons in the same way, the same style. This reason and that reason, and davar acher. And some say, or another option would be this. Anyway, bottom line is Beis Shammai says these two reasons, and one of the reasons is that Beis Shammai holds, of course, the opposite of what we do, which is Kiddush, Mekadesh Shabbos, and then only afterwards you do the wine. And what's the reason? Because the day causes the wine to come. If not for the Shabbos day, you would not be drinking this wine. In other words, the obligation of having this wine is because of the day of Shabbos. The day of Shabbos is causing you to be obligated in drinking wine. The commentaries deal with, what about if you're making Kiddush on bread? All these, they try to connect these two reasons with, would they both apply if you were making Kiddush on bread also? Yeah, but they also deal with the question of, well, in the olden days, they used to drink wine at every meal anyway. So what do you mean the day is causing the wine to come? The wine anyway is here because the custom is we drink wine before every meal.
Rabbi, question.
Yes.
Okay, so in creation, Shabbat came because God stopped working.
Right.
Wine didn't show up until mankind was created. And so therefore, based on that, that's the reason why I would think Shabbat comes before the blessing for the wine. On the wine.
Well, that's a little similar to the second reason. It's not the same, but it sounds similar to it, that first you have Shabbos comes, and then you make Kiddush. You know, in other words, what's the order of things? You know, you first have Shabbos, and then what did Adam Harishon do? He squeezed the grape juice, the grapes, and he made the kiddush. And so the order of things is that you have Shabbos comes first, and then you have kiddush. So that sounds a little similar to the second reason, though. You're mentioning it that it's about what was done and what man has to do. Is that you're emphasizing that, or more like what came first? Uh, if you want to see like in the order of things, it seems like Shabbos came in and then you make Kiddush, and that's the normal way to do things. Shabbos kicks in, and then right after Shabbos kicks in is when you make Kiddush. So that's sort of his second reason, that the wine first is I'm sorry, I shouldn't use the term makes Kiddush because it gets confusing here. We're talking about wine and Kiddush, and we have to divide the two. So what I should say is the holiness of the day kicks in first, and then you do the wine part of the Kiddush. And that is why Beis Shammai says first do the holiness of the day, in that element of the Kiddush, and then you do the wine part of the Kiddush. That's the second point that Beis Shammai says. The first point is that the day is what causes the wine to come. And the understanding is, and again, I was asking that all the days of the week in the olden days, they used to have wine without having Shabbos, without having the holiness of the day. So what does it mean the day causes the wine? Well, it seems that it has to do with the obligation, that it becomes an obligation to have the day causes wine to be an obligation to drink. So if the day is what's causing the wine to be an obligation, first you got to sanctify the day. The day is the cause of the wine being an obligation, not cause of drinking wine. It's cause of an obligation of drinking wine. And
I would have said if mankind was not created, Shabbat would have still been there, no matter what.
mm-hmm.
So it gets primacy over anything else. Then the fact that God created man, and he in fact squeezed I mean, you call it squeeze the grape, okay, fine. I mean, the first time it's even mentioned in the Torah is when Noah did it. I would say that's the second event that that occurred. And so therefore, based on, if you want to use Tadir Venu Tadir, Shabbat is always there, and then man came after the fact, and he squeezed the wine, caused
right.
the existence of the bracha.
Actually, you could take your idea a little further and say, look at what happened. Adam Arishan ate from the Eitz Hadas before Shabbos kicked in. And what was the Eitz Hadas? According to one opinion, it was the grapes. So he couldn't control himself to have the kiddush for Shabbos. Instead, he drank the wine first before Shabbos. So for sure, we got to do kiddush first, and then do the wine. You could like add that idea that like look at the sin that came about. Of course, we can't do the bracha of wine first, right? That sounds like a good reason. We don't follow Adam Arishan's sin. You know, do the whole idea was he should have waited for Shabbos to kick in and then do the bracha on the wine. And instead, he did the wine before he ate from the Eitz Hadas, and then anyway, it's an interesting thought. Yeah, I hear you. I hear you. The truth of the matter is, the Gemara Brachas, this discussion is this argument is a Mishnah in Brachas, and then the reasons are mentioned in a Brisa. The Gemara here brings the Brisa because it wants to bring the reasons, and over there the Gemara does go into that these are the only reasons of Beis Shammai. Like in other words, that it sounds like maybe there's no other, that this is the reasons without other reasons. Now we have to look up that Gemara exactly how it develops over there, but that's that's the main place where this Gemara is, and that's where we could look into look into these other ideas that maybe you could have, you might have other reasons seemingly could work for Beis Shammai. Now, the Gemara here. So we have this idea that the day causes the wine, the obligation of the wine, and then we also have this idea that the day kicks in first, and then you make kiddush on the wine. First, the holiday, the holiness of Shabbos kicks in, and then you're gonna do the wine. So if the holiness of Shabbos kicks in first before you're dealing with the wine, before the wine arrives, so really the bracha mekadesh Shabbos should come first, and only afterwards you would say the bracha on the wine. That's the second reason of Beis Shammai. Now, what about if you make early Shabbos? When you make early Shabbos, so the kiddush is before the day gets dark. You're making kiddush; it's still light out. It's a plaga mincha. It's, it's a plaga mincha. You daven ma'ariv and you make kiddush. It's before shkia. It's before sunset. And so if you make early Shabbos, how does this fit? Or would Beis Shammai change his opinion then? In other words, if you make Shabbos early, would Beis Shammai say, okay, now because the Shabbos, because the wine comes before the day, so here maybe you should say the bracha on the wine first before the Makadesh Shabbos. Like, well, what does he do about a time when it's when you make early Shabbos? And how does he say? Why does he make it like it's a rule? Ukvar kiddush hayoim. You always have the holiness of the day before you have the kiddush. And so the commentaries ask this, the Rishonim, the early commentaries ask this, and they say that the holiness of the day kicks in when you make early Shabbos. You're accepting Shabbos early before you do the wine. So even then, it's called, even though we're not talking about the actual day of Shabbos arrived, but your acceptance of Shabbos has already kicked in, and that is enough to say the Mekadesh Shabbos, sanctifying the Shabbos, and only afterwards would you say the bracha on the wine, because you've accepted, because you're not allowed to do work, and so the holiness of the day kicks in right away. Right away when you're accepting Shabbos or when you're starting the Kiddush. Once you take the cup already, it's accepted. It's you're already the holiness of Shabbos arrives before you'd say the Kiddush. Anyway, they seem to talk about this as a one of the questions that accepting Shabbos, that people make early Shabbos sounds like it would contradict this, but it doesn't. It's not a problem. Now, Beis Hillel, the Gemara wants to say, Beis Hillel would fit with the reason of Beis Hillel is, what's the reason of Beis Hillel? So he has these two reasons, and we know the reason of Todyer, which is the second reason, that it's more often the bracha on the wine. Now, well, let's start with this first reason. The first reason is that the wine causes the kiddush. The wine is what's causing you to recite this kiddush. So therefore, you should say the bracha on the wine, because if not for the wine, you would not be reciting this kiddush. You would be yotze with the kiddush and shul, with the kiddush in your davening. And your davening includes a kiddush because you say the bracha mekadesh Shabbos and davening, and that would be sort of the kiddush that you would be fulfilling. And therefore, the wine is what's causing you to say this bracha on at home on your kiddush. The wine is the cause of this bracha, of this additional kiddush, and therefore the wine should come first. This is Beis Hillel's reason. Now, Beis Hillel, so let's just think about that. So the wine is what's causing this kiddush, right? So in other words, because you really fulfilled your obligation when you davened. It's a famous question of how do you, if a person davens and fulfills his biblical obligation of kiddush, so how does he fulfill the mitzvah for his wife when he comes home and makes kiddush for his wife he's only making Kiddush on a rabbinic level, and his wife is obligated on a biblical level because she didn't daven Ma'ariv. A lot of women don't daven Ma'ariv. And so if a man fulfills his obligation in Shul, so how does he go and make Kiddush for his wife and fulfill her obligation if he's not obligated? The whole concept of fulfilling someone else's obligation is if you are obligated on the same level, you could fulfill the mitzvah for someone else. So if there's a din of arvus, if a woman is included in the mitzvah of the concept of arvus, that Kol Yisrael Arevim Zelazeh, you're responsible for her. So that means you also have an obligation, a biblical obligation for her kiddush. But if there's no mitzvah of arvus, which seems to be a discussion, if women are included in arvus, if women are not included in arvus, so there you have a question. In other words, you could go make kiddush for another man, but how could you make kiddush for a woman if she's obligated biblically and you're only obligated on a rabbinic level? How would your kiddush fulfill the mitzvah for her? So some say once she says good Shabbos, she fulfills her biblical obligation. There is such a concept. That she says good Shabbos, she's already fulfilled her obligation. Anyway, bottom line is that the concept of the wine causes the kiddush. The wine is the cause for reciting this kiddush, and therefore the wine should come first, and that's Beis Hillel's opinion. And then he has another reason of tadir, that it's more often the wine is much more often than the bracha mekadesh Shabbos. Why is the wine more often? So, I mean, on a simple level, you could say, well, people drink wine much more often, but seemingly the idea would be more connected to obligations, similar to what we saw before, that the obligation of the day causes the obligation of wine. It seems like that would be more of a the concept would be more if it's an obligation. The tadir, the fact that it's more common, that just because people do it that way doesn't necessarily make it more called tadir in halachic terms. Makes more tadir, more, so the mitzvah is special, you have to do it. Not because people do it more often. Seemingly it's because it's a mitzvah that's tadir. A mitzvah tadir has a special holiness to it, so to speak, a special benefit to it, a plus to it. And so the concept of tadir here seemingly is the fact that not only do you recite the bracha wine for kiddush, but it's also recited for Havdalah. It's recited for weddings. It's and therefore it would be considered more tadir, more often, and it has a special quality to that, special plus. So now there is another question here. Beis Hillel seemingly has a third way, should have another reason why the bracha wine should come before the kiddush. Beis Hillel should have another reason. No, let me say that differently. The opposite. Beis Shammai should have another reason. Why should the kiddush be before the wine? The bracha on wine is rabbinic. The bracha on kiddush is a mitzvah to be makadesh the Shabbos. Zochar Yom Shabbos l'kadsha. It's a mitzvah to be makadesh the Shabbos. So seemingly, the bracha of kiddush should be first before the bracha of the wine. D'oraisa, this is biblical. So maybe that should be a reason. Biblical should come before rabbinic. So one understanding is that you see from here that you don't say that. A bracha that's rabbinic does not necessarily come after a bracha that's biblical. You see that from here? Why doesn't Beis Shammai say that reason? It must be that it's not so. That a bracha that's biblical doesn't necessarily come before a bracha that's rabbinic. Or you could say, like we mentioned earlier, that you were already fulfilled the mitzvah of Kiddush and Shul, davening, when you said the Shemona Esrei of Shabbos. And therefore, even the bracha Kiddush of Mekadesh Shabbos, the bracha on the Shabbos, is also rabbinic, just like the bracha on the wine. So if they're both rabbinic, then you don't have this explanation. If one of them is biblical, then you would say maybe the biblical should come first. So again, there's two understandings here. One is that we don't say a bracha that's biblical comes before a bracha that's rabbinic. You see that from Beis Shammai. That Beis Shammai doesn't give this reason. Or the idea is that this is not called biblical because really you fulfilled your obligation with reciting Shemona Esrei. Okay, anyway, these are the two opinions of Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel, and then the Gemara says, let's compare the two. And the Gemara asks that Rav should hold like Beis Shammai and Rabbi Bar Bachana should hold like Beis Hillel, again, because Rav's opinion emphasized reciting the bracha of the day, so to speak, before the bracha Shechiyanu, which is very similar to Beis Shammai, the bracha of the day before the bracha of the wine. Similar idea. And as I mentioned earlier, even though the reasons of Beis Shammai don't seem to fit with Rav's reason, nevertheless, it could be that Beis Shammai has a deeper reason that he didn't really say, and maybe that's Rav's reason. Or, like I mentioned, maybe a thought that maybe the reason of Rav is a little vague. Maybe that reason is sort of what Beis Shammai, maybe that's what Beis Shammai is really saying. Rav says a reason of chiyuva diyoyma adif, which it's not really clear what that means. So maybe he's actually saying the same reasons as Beis Shammai. Maybe Rav is following Beis Shammai, and Rabbi Bar Bachana is following Beis Hillel because he holds at least the second reason of Tadir. That's that there's the reason of Tadir is that the for Kiddush you should say the bracha of wine before the bracha of Mekadesh Shabbos. And Tadir applies to Sukkah, that you would say the bracha of Shechiyanu, you would say the bracha of Shechiyanu before the bracha of Leishev Basukkah. Okay, so that's the Gemara's question. And what does the Gemara answer? The Gemara says that Rav could say, I follow even Beis Hillel, and Rabbi Bar Chana would say, I follow even Beis Shammai. That's the Gemara's answer. What does this mean? So Rav says I could follow even Beis Hillel because Beis Hillel says their case, in a case where the wine is causing the Kiddush to be recited. The wine is causing the Kiddush to be recited, therefore you say the wine first. And just the reason of Tadir alone, that wouldn't be good enough to say the bracha of Beis Hillel says both reasons. He says Tadir, and he says the Yayin Geirim L'Kidusha, that the wine is causing the Kiddush to be recited, and therefore you say the bracha on the wine first. He says two reasons. And so the Gemara says that the reason of Tadir is not good enough. You really need both reasons to really make it that you really need both reasons in order to make it that you should say the bracha on the wine before the Kiddush. And otherwise, even Beis Hillel would agree with me that you say that when you don't have both reasons, we don't go by Tadir. We don't go by what's more often. We go instead by the Chiyuva D'Yoyma. So when you have both of these reasons, then fine, you can do Tadir. But when you don't have both of these reasons, you do what I say. So therefore, Rav says I fit with everyone. Now, Rabbi Bar Bachana says, I fit even with Beis Shammai. Why do I fit with Beis Shammai? So the Gemara says, because Beis Shammai only said their law that in a case where the day is causing the wine to come. Beis Shammai said the yoim is goyim layayim. Therefore, you say the bracha mekadesh Shabbos before the bracha wine on the wine. That's where Beis Shammai says the law. But here, one is not dependent on the other. If you don't have a sukkah, you still say shachiyanu. So one is not dependent on the other, and therefore, we wouldn't say this idea that you would have to do the yom first. You don't have to do the yom. If the wine is goyrim to the yayin to sheyavai, then you do the yom first. But otherwise, you would do the tadir. And that's why Beis Shammai would even agree with me in my case, in the case of the shachiyanu and the leishe basukah. So that's what the way the Gemara understands that it's not an argument. They're not dependent on each other. Okay. Then the Gemara says we seem to have a proof from our Mishnah, because our Mishnah said that on Shavuos, first it's Halach matzah and then Halach chametz. So what do you see from the Mishnah? That first you do the matzah, which is the lechem hapanim, and then you do the chametz, which is the shtei alechem on Shavuos, that one day a year that you have this special offering of the two breads made from wheat flour, and they're made chametz. And what do you do first? First, you do the lechem hapanim, the showbreads, which are matzah, and they're done every week. And only afterwards you do the chametz, which is the shtei alechem. And you see that you go by what's more usual, what's more often. And instead of looking at the chametz, which is the day mitzvah, the chametz is this is the mitzvah of the day, the chametz. Nope, we don't look at that. Matzah is really like the secondary thing. Really, the work, the avodah of the matzah was really done before, and nevertheless, it says halach matzah, halach chametz, and so you see, it seems to prove Rav wrong in Rav's opinion about that Rav thought the sukkah should come before shachiyanu. No, you would do the shachiyanu first. So it proves Rav wrong. The Gemara says no. Rav also has a source, and what's his source? A brisa. The brisa says that instead of saying the brisa brings two opinions, one of them is the matzah comes first and then the chametz, but the other opinion, Abba Shol, holds chametz is first and then the matzah. So you see, Rav holds like Abba Shol, and the day is comes first. The obligation of the day comes first before you have the other concept of tadir, something that's more usual. No, you first do the day. And so that's the conclusion of the Gemara that we learned yesterday. I wanted to bring a proof from our Mishnah, but it's not a proof, because we also have another opinion, Abba Shol. It's brought in a brisa. It's not in the Mishnah, it's in a brisa. Okay, now we're going to start a new it's connected, this piece. It's about what's the halacha. So where are we over here? Darash Rav Nachman bar Rav Chizda. We're on page 56a, and we are 15 lines up from the bottom of the page, 15 lines up. It's Darash Rav Nachman bar Rav Chizda, 56a, 15 lines up from the bottom. Rav Nachman bar Rav Chizda darshans, and he says, Loi kedivrei Rav. We don't follow Rav. The halacha is not like Rav. The Amar that says sukkah v'yachikach zman. That first you do leisha basukah, then you do shachiyanu. Ela zman v'yachikach sukkah. Rather, what do you do first? You do shachiyanu, and afterwards you do, 'leishev' 'basukah. 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 'Leis Okay. Rav Sheshes braid Rav Idi Amar. Rav Sheshes braid Rav Idi says, Sukkah v'yacher kach zman. That no, you really do Sukkah first and afterwards Shechiyanu. The Hilchasa and the halacha is Sukkah v'yacher kach zman. The halacha is that first Sukkah and afterwards Shechiyanu, and that is the halacha. Now, of course, this is a topic of much discussion. We are familiar with the difference between the first day and the second day of Yom Tov, and that we flip it. On the first day, we do Shechiyanu last. First, we do Leisha Basukah, then Shechiyanu. The second day, we do Shechiyanu, and then Leisha Basukah afterwards. So it's a topic of much discussion. Maybe tomorrow we'll talk more about it. In the meantime, I want to do the next piece of Gemara. So we're going to continue in the Gemara. And maybe tomorrow we'll talk more about the halacha. So the next piece of Gemara is Mishmar Shezmanoi Kavua. The Mishmar, that this is their week. The Shezmanoi Kavua, they bring the Tamuz, the weekly, daily, the daily communal sacrifices called Karban Tamid. They bring the Nadarim and the Davais, all the donation sacrifices, and they bring Usha'ar Karbanos Tzibor and the other sacrifices of the of the community, the congregation, the other Karbanos, and Usha'ar Karbanos Tzibor. The Gemara says, La Asuye Mai. What does it mean to add when it says this general statement? They bring all the other karbanis. Well, like what are we talking about? So the Gemara says, La Asuye, this is to include, to add, Par Helam Davar Shel Tzibur, the bull that is brought when there's a Helam Davar, something concealed from the community, which means that the Bezdin made a mistake, and they paskined wrong to the community. It's the whole tractate Huriyos is about this type of a thing where Bezdin makes a mistake, and they permitted something that was prohibited. It's something that you chayiv kares on if you do on purpose. And the community got a lenient ruling from the Bezdin, and they followed it. And then Bezdin realized that they're wrong. So they bring, there's a bull that is brought for this type of situation. And of course, the whole tractate Huriyah, a lot of tractate Huriyah is about this. Each of the tribes have to bring this bull, or is it brought by the, just one bull for the whole Klal Yisrael? But anyway, bottom line is that is what who brings that? If that's brought on that Yom Tov of that all the Kayanim are there to do the service, who gets to do the service of this sin offering, and who gets the also what the portions that are given from this? Who does it go to? Does it go to only the mishmar, the watching, the group that's there for the week, that's meant to be this week, or does it go to all the community? And so the Mishnah here says, Ushar Karbanos Tzibor, that all the other Karbanos of the community, where does that go? They go, who does them and who gets a portion of them? Only the group that it's their week, this week specifically. It doesn't go to all the Kayanim, the whole world of Kayanim. No, it only goes to that week's Kayanim, the Mishmar that's meant for that week. And this is so that's what it means. Shar Karbanos Tzibor. It refers to this par Helam Davar Shel Tzibor, this bull that's brought for a mistake that was done by Bezdin, and the community sinned by doing it, thinking that it's permissible, and they have to bring a sin offering, and that is done by the Mishmar Kavua, the set Mishmar for this week. And another type of carbon, very similar to this, and that is if the sin was avodah zara. What do you do? What do the Bezdin do? What do they have to do if they make a mistake about a type of idol worship, a certain way of worshiping that they said was permissible, and really it's prohibited, and they permitted it, by mistake, and then they realize that it's wrong. So they have to bring usiire avodas koichavim, the he-goats of avodah zara, and they bring as a carbon chatos when Bezin makes such a mistake and permits something that has to do with avodah zara, and the community does that, and so that also is brought by the mishmar kavua, by the official mishmar of that week, and not by the entire congregation family of Kayanim. Now comes the next sentence in the Mishnah, which also is seems to be adding something about the mishmar that's that week does something else. It says Vahu, in that mishmar, that group is Makrib es hakol. This is the next little piece, and it says they bring everything. What does that refer? What is that including? In other words, first it said Shar Kabana Siver, other communal sacrifice. Then it says Makrib es hakol, he brings everything. Okay, there must be something else that we missed out. What is that referring to? La suye mai, what's that adding? So the Gemara says La suye kayetz hamizbeach, that's including the burnt offerings that are brought to as like that the mizbeach should never look like it's empty. Whenever we find that the mizbeach was empty, they would bring sacrifices, burnt offerings, in order to make the mizbeach to make it look like it's it's constantly having sacrifices. It looks good that it's always, and so it's so it's called the kayetz hamizbeach, the kayetz of the mizbeach. Kayetz is a type of fig that was dried, and they were normally eaten as dessert. So they would bring these karbanos almost like a dessert. So the term refers to dessert for the mizbeach, that you bring all these. It's after they bring the obligatory sacrifices, now you have some extra sacrifices as dessert for the mizbeach. And where does the word dessert come from? Because kayetz refers to these figs that were eaten, that were dried figs that were eaten as like a dessert. Now, this is, so who brings these sacrifices? Again, when the mizbeach is empty, when it's quiet during downtime, what did they do? They would bring extra sacrifices called kayetz hamizbeach, this special sacrifices specifically for this downtime, that it should be that the mizbeach has sacrifices and should look like it's has often. It shouldn't be empty without sacrifices. It's always has sacrifices, and so they would bring these karbanos. Who brings them, and who gets the hide from these burnt offerings? Who brings them, and who gets the hide? The mishmar hakavua, the official mishmar that's meant for this this week. That mishmar gets to do that work and gets those hides. Now comes the Mishnah. The next Mishnah says, Yom Tov asamach l'Shabbos. A Yom Tov that's near Shabbos, meaning Yom Tov falls on a Sunday, or Yom Tov falls on a Friday, and it ends, and then comes Shabbos right afterwards. So it's a Yom Tov that's right next to Shabbos. So here the question is, we just got all this information about the entire family of Koyanim being able to participate in holiday sacrifices. They also participate in getting a portion of the showbread. Well, what about if the Shabbos is not on the holiday, but it's the day before the holiday or the day right after the holiday? What about the showbread then? Are they also eligible for the day before and the day after, since obviously they're not traveling on that day? So that day maybe should be included as part of the holiday type of a ruling, and they should be able to get the lechem hapanim, the showbread. Now, they're not going to be able to bring the sacrifices that day, because the sacrifices on the Shabbos before, the Shabbos after, are connected to Shabbos. That's not their part. That's not the regular, the entire family of Koyanim don't get anything that's regular. They only get the extra holiday stuff. But the lechem apanim is different, because the lechem apanim was unique in that it, even though it was really not connected to the holiday, but we had a pasuk that taught us that all the kainim get a portion of that lechem apanim of the showbread. So the question would be, what about Yom Tov that falls next to Shabbos? Yom Tov asamach l'Shabbos. Bein milfanah, whether it's before the Shabbos, whether Yom Tov falls and ends right before Shabbos. Bein milacharel, whether it starts right after the Shabbos, it starts on a Sunday. But all in those cases, hayu kol hamishmaros shavos. All the mishmaros are equal. B'chiluk lechem apanim. Believe it or not, they're all going to get. This is surprising. You would think that they have nothing to do with that showbread. That showbread is not on Yom Tov. That's the day before. But the Mishnah tells us that they all get a portion of that showbread, and since they anyway have to be in the Beis Hamikdash, that Shabbos is part of the holiday. Basically, it's right before. You can't travel, so it's included. It's part of it falls into the category of being able to get a portion. Now, this is not biblical. This is a rabbinic decree. This is a takanas chachamim. This is not the regular law, because we don't see it in the pasuk, but the pasuk mentions on the holiday that implies that it's on the holiday. This is the day before, but this is a rabbinic decree. Okay, we're going to stop here. Sei gesund, everyone. Have a wonderful day.
You too, Rabbi. Thank you very much.
Okay, you're welcome.